Anne Reeves drew a circle on the board with yellow chalk. Inside it, she wrote the word promise in letters big enough for all her students to see. 3 small Kilari children sat in the front row, their crystalline shells catching the light from the windows. Their names were Pip, Cress, and Nell. They were young enough that their shells were still soft and translucent, showing the pale blue flesh underneath. Among the Quilari, these children were called crystals, treasured and protected above all else. Who knows what this word means? Anne asked, turning to face the classroom. Her voice carried the warmth that had made her beloved among both human and alien families in Dusthaven Colony. A human boy in the back raised his hand. It means you say you'll do something. Close, Anne said, smiling. But it's more than just saying. It's a commitment. You bind yourself to an action, to another person. You give your word. Pip's antennae twitched with curiosity. The young Kilari spoke in the clicking musical language of his people, which the translation device rendered into human speech. What happens if you break a promise? Then you've broken something more than words, Anne replied. She sat on the edge of her desk, a habit that made Director Halson uncomfortable but put the children at ease. You've broken trust, and trust is the foundation of everything we build together. Humans, Quilari, all of us living here on Dusthaven, we survive because we keep our promises to each other. Cress raised a delicate limb. Did you make a promise, Teacher Anne? Anne's expression softened. She looked at each of the Quilari children in turn. Yes. When your parents allowed you to come to this school to learn alongside human children, I promised them something. I promised I would keep you safe. All of you, every child in this room. Nell, the smallest of the 3 Quilari, made a sound like wind chimes. It was how her species showed affection. We feel safe with you. The afternoon continued with lessons about Earth history, about the old wars before humanity reached the stars, about how people learn to work together or fall apart. Anne taught with stories rather than lectures. She told them about a human general who surrendered his entire army to save a single city of civilians. She told them about a Quilari hive that chose to starve rather than abandon their sick. She taught them that courage and sacrifice were not unique to any one species, but choices that all thinking beings could make. Outside the windows, Dusthaven sprawled across a rocky plain under a purple sky. The colony was small, barely 5,000 souls split between humans and Quilari. It existed on the edge of known space, far from the protection of major fleets or stations. That isolation was exactly why both species had chosen it. Here they could build something new together, away from the old prejudices and fears. When the final bell rang, children scattered toward the doors with the universal enthusiasm of young ones freed from study. But Pip, Cress, and Nell lingered behind as they often did. They helped Anne clean the boards and organize the tablets for the next day. Teacher Anne, Pip asked while stacking chairs, why do humans use incomplete sentences sometimes? Yesterday you said if only and then stopped. What comes after if only? Anne paused in her work. That's called an ellipsis, Pip. Sometimes we leave thoughts unfinished because the listener understands what we mean, or because some feelings are too big for words to hold. But how do we know what you meant? Cress asked. You fill it in yourself, Anne said. You use context, emotion, everything you know about the speaker. Language isn't just what we say, it's what we mean, what we feel, what goes unsaid. The 3 Quilari exchanged glances, their antennae touching briefly in the way their kind communicated privately. Finally, Nell spoke. We like learning human things, even the confusing parts. Anne knelt down to their level, her face serious. And I like teaching you. You 3 are going to bridge worlds someday. You'll help humans and Quilari understand each other in ways my generation never could. The comfortable moment shattered when alarms began wailing across the colony. The sound was unmistakable, a rising and falling shriek that meant only one thing: danger, attack, emergency. Anne's training from her years as a Marine medic kicked in immediately. She moved to the classroom door and locked it, then pulled down the metal shutters over the windows. Her hands were steady despite the fear that must have been coursing through her. Children, everyone, come here now, she called out. A few students had been in the bathroom or gathering their things. They rushed to her voice, eyes wide with fear. We're going to play the quiet game, the one we practiced. Remember? They nodded. Anne led them to the back corner of the classroom where a reinforced storage unit was built into the wall. She'd had it modified specifically for this purpose. though she'd prayed she'd never need to use it. The door was thick, the walls doubled, the interior stocked with water and air recyclers. Inside, quickly. Pip, Cress, Nell, you three first, then the rest of you. What's happening? Asked a human girl, her voice trembling. Something bad, sweetheart. But you're all going to be fine. I promise. There was that word again. Promise. She helped each child into the cramped space. 16 children total, pressing together in the darkness. The 3 Kalari children positioned themselves to support the smaller humans, their soft shells flexing to provide cushioning. Anne's communicator crackled with Director Halson's voice, distorted by static. Raiders, armed, they bypassed our defenses. All personnel implement lockdown procedures. Defense forces en route, estimated 20 minutes. An eternity in a firefight. Anne knew this. She'd lived through combat before, back when she wore a different uniform and made different kinds of promises. She looked at the children one last time. Pip stared back at her with multifaceted eyes that reflected her face 100 times over. Teacher Anne, you remember the rules of the quiet game? No sounds, no matter what you hear, until you hear the all-clear bells. 3 long rings. Not before then. Can you do that for me? Yes, Pip whispered. Will you be with us? Nell asked. Anne's smile was gentle, but there was something else in it too. Something final. I'm going to make sure nobody finds you. That's my job now. That's my promise, Cress's antennae drooped. You're going to fight them. I'm going to protect you, Anne corrected. Now quiet game starts now. She sealed the door. The lock clicked with a sound of terrible finality. The children were safe inside, but Anne was outside. Alone. She heard boots in the hallway, heavy and fast. Voices shouting in human languages, crude and violent. Raiders weren't subtle. They came for whatever they could steal. And in a colony like this, that meant supplies, data, and worse. There were black markets for Quillari biological material. The soft shells of young crystals were especially valuable. Anne grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. She positioned herself between the storage unit and the door to her classroom. Let them come through her first. The door exploded inward. 3 raiders in mismatched armor burst through, weapons raised. They saw Anne standing there with a fire extinguisher, and one of them laughed. Just a teacher, he said. Where are the bug kids? We scanned this building. There should be crystals here. Anne raised the extinguisher like a club. Her voice was steady. There are no children here. You're in the wrong place, liar. Another raider snarled. He advanced on her. Tell us where they are, and maybe you live through this. Anne thought about promises, about trust, about the words she'd written on the board just hours ago. She thought about 3 small Kalari children who'd stayed late to help her clean, who'd asked about incomplete sentences and wanted to bridge worlds. She thought about what she'd told Pip that morning about courage and sacrifice being choices, all thinking beings could make. Then she made her choice. Anne swung the extinguisher with all her strength. The fight was brief and brutal. Anne had training, but she was one woman against 3 armed raiders. She managed to drop one with a lucky hit to the helmet. She led them away from the storage unit, toward the other side of the room, making them chase her, making them angry, making them forget why they'd come here in the first place. The second raider shot her in the shoulder. The third shot her in the side. Anne fell to her knees but forced herself to stand again. Blood soaked her shirt. Her vision blurred, but she stayed between them and the children. Always between them and the children. Crazy woman, one of the raiders spat. Why die for bugs? Anne stumbled toward them, drawing them further from the hidden storage unit. Her legs barely held her weight. She could feel her life draining away with each heartbeat, but she had to buy more time. Just a little more time for the defense forces to arrive. She opened her mouth to speak, to give them one final misdirection, one last lie to keep them from finding her students. Her voice came out wet and weak. Children, when you remember this day, remember that humans believe. The third raider shot her through the chest. Anne Reeves fell mid-sentence. She collapsed onto the floor of her classroom, surrounded by scattered tablets and overturned desks and the yellow chalk circle she'd drawn that morning. The word promise was still visible on the board behind her. She died with her eyes open, still facing the raiders, still between them and the storage unit. Inside their hiding place, 3 Quillari children heard everything. They heard Director Halson watched the security footage for the 7th time. His hands shook as he reached for the pause button. The image froze on Anne's face, captured in the moment before the final shot. Her expression showed no fear, only determination. 3 days had passed since the raid. The colony held its breath in collective grief. 23 people had died defending Dust Haven, but Anne's death struck differently. Perhaps because of how she died. Perhaps because of who she saved. In a medical bay across the colony, Pip, Cress, and Nell sat together on a single bed meant for humans. Their shells had darkened slightly, a physical response to trauma. A Quillari caretaker named Vril stood nearby, mandibles clicking with worry. "You must eat," Vril said in the flowing language of their people. "Your shells need nutrients to recover from the shock." Pip's antennae remained motionless. This was wrong. Young Quillari should be in constant motion, their antennae tasting the air, reading the emotions of those around them. But Pip was still as stone. "What did she say?" Pip asked in human language. "We heard her voice. We heard her fall." But the word stopped. Vril's carapace shifted in confusion. This behavior was unprecedented. Quillari young who experienced trauma returned to the hive mind for comfort, for shared grief. But these three rejected the mental touch of their elders. They wanted something else, something Vril didn't understand. A human woman entered the bay. Dr. Yuki Sato was a linguist who'd been studying Quillari communication patterns. She'd worked closely with Anne on integration curriculum. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice remained professional. "I've been reviewing the security footage," she said quietly. "The audio cuts out at the critical moment. Too much interference from the weapons fire. But I might be able to reconstruct what she said using lip-reading software." All three Quillari children turned to her with sudden, intense focus. Cress spoke in halting human words. "You can know? You can tell us?" "I can try," Yuki said. She sat down on the floor so she was level with them. "But I need you to understand something first. Last words are complicated. Humans put a lot of importance on them. We believe the final thing someone says reveals their true heart. But sometimes last words are just interrupted thoughts. Sometimes they don't mean anything special. They mean something," Nell said with absolute certainty. Teacher Anne chose her words carefully. Always, every lesson, every story. She never spoke without purpose. Yuki blinked back tears. "You're right. She didn't. Show us," Pip demanded. It was the first time any of them had demanded anything. Quillari children didn't demand. They requested. They suggested. They harmonized with the group. But Pip demanded. Yuki pulled out her tablet and brought up the footage. The three Quillari children watched as their teacher fought. They saw her take the first shot and keep standing. They saw her take the second and refuse to fall. They saw her stumble forward, drawing the raiders away from the storage unit where they hid. "There," Yuki said, advancing frame by frame. "She's speaking. Children, when you remember this day, remember that humans believe." And then she falls. The footage showed Anne collapsing. It showed the raiders stepping over her body, searching the room. It showed them finding nothing, growing frustrated, and finally fleeing when defense forces arrived. It showed Anne dying alone on the floor of her classroom. "Believe what?" Cress asked. "Believe in what?" "I don't know," Yuki admitted. The sentence is incomplete. She might have been about to say believe in hope or believe in peace or believe in protecting others. Without the rest, we can only guess. "Guessing is not knowing," Pip said. "We need to know." Over the next 3 days, the colony prepared Anne's funeral. Humans had ceremonies for death that Quillari found strange and inefficient. Why preserve a body? Why gather to speak to someone who could no longer hear? Why not simply return the organic matter to the collective and move forward? But Pip, Cress, and Nell insisted on attending. They stood in the front row as human after human spoke about Anne, about her kindness, about her dedication, about her sacrifice. Commander Francis, a Marine who'd served with Anne years ago, stepped up to speak. His dress uniform bore medals from a dozen campaigns. His voice was rough with emotion. "Anne Reeves was the best of us," he said. "She left the Corps because she was tired of war. She wanted to build instead of destroy. She wanted to teach instead of fight. But when the moment came when evil knocked on her door, she didn't hesitate. She stood her ground. She kept her promise." Pip's antennae twitched at that word. Promise. The last lesson Anne had taught them. After the ceremony, the three Quillari children approached Commander Francis. Around them, humans embraced and wept openly. The cultural display of grief made Vril uncomfortable. but the children seemed fascinated. "Commander," Pip said. "You knew Teacher Anne before, when she was a warrior." Francis looked down at the three small aliens. His expression softened. "I did. She saved my life twice, once during a breach on Europa Station, once during the frontier conflicts. She was fearless." "No," Nell said quietly. "She was afraid." We heard it in her voice. "In the classroom, when the alarms rang, she was very afraid." Francis knelt down, his old knees cracking. "You're right. She was afraid. We were all afraid in combat. But Anne fought anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it." "Why did she choose to die?" Cress asked. "The hive teaches us that survival of the group is paramount. She could have hidden with us. Survival probability would have increased. She didn't choose to die," Francis said. "She chose for you to live. There's a difference." The children absorbed this in silence. Around them, the memorial continued. Humans told stories about Anne. They laughed at funny memories. They cried at sad ones. They transformed their grief into shared remembrance. But the three Quillari children didn't cry. Couldn't cry. Their species didn't process grief the same way. Instead, they whispered among themselves in frequencies humans couldn't hear. "We must understand," Pip whispered. "We must learn what she meant." Cress agreed. "We must finish her sentence," Nell finished. That night, they refused to return to the Quillari section of the colony. They insisted on staying in the human quarters in Anne's old apartment. Director Halson tried to object, but Vril made a gesture of surrender with his mandibles. "Let them," Vril said. "They're experiencing something new, something the hive has never felt before. We must observe. We must learn." Inside Anne's apartment, the three children explored carefully. They touched her books. They examined her photographs. They found her personal computer and, with permission, accessed her files. Anne had kept journals. Video logs where she talked about her day, her thoughts, her hopes for the colony. The children watched every single one, staying awake through the night cycle. In one entry, dated 2 months before her death, Anne spoke directly to the camera with unusual intensity. "I've been thinking about what makes humans different," she said. "Not better or worse than other species, just different. And I think it comes down to belief. We believe in things that can't be proven. We believe in goodness when surrounded by evil. We believe in hope when logic says there is none. We believe in each other even when we have every reason not to. That belief, that stubborn, illogical faith in things larger than ourselves, that's what makes us human." She paused, looking directly into the camera, "And I believe we can teach that to others. Not force it, but share it. Show it through actions. The Quillari think we're reckless and emotional. Maybe we are, but our recklessness comes from believing that some things matter more than survival. Our emotions come from believing that feelings have value. If I can teach that to the crystals, to show them that there's strength in individual choice, in personal conviction, then maybe we really can build something new here." The video ended. The three children sat in silence for a long moment. "She wanted to teach us to believe," Pip said slowly. "Not in something specific, but how to believe at all." "The hive doesn't believe," Cress said. "The hive knows or doesn't know. Calculates probability. Assesses risk. But belief? Individual personal belief? That's not part of us." "It wasn't," Nell corrected. "But Teacher Anne fell mid-sentence believing we could learn. She died believing we mattered. She believed it so strongly she gave her life for it." They sat together in Anne's apartment, three young Quillari trying to process a concept their entire species had never truly grasped. Individual belief. Personal faith. The idea that one being could hold a conviction separate from the collective and find it worth dying for. "We still don't know what she wanted us to believe," Pip said. "Hope, peace. Something else?" "Maybe," Cress said quietly. "The answer is in how she lived, not in what she might have said." Over the following weeks, the colony tried to return to normal. But nothing was normal anymore. The three Quillari children attended memorial services. They interviewed every human who'd known Anne. They studied human philosophy, human religion, human poetry. They searched for the end of her sentence in every text, every conversation, every fragment of human culture they could absorb. Other Quillari found this behavior disturbing. Children were supposed to return to the hive after trauma, to be comforted by the collective mind. But Pip, Cress, and Nell refused that comfort. They isolated themselves, becoming more and more like individual beings rather than parts of a whole. Vril reported this to the Kalari leadership with growing concern. "They're changing," he said, "becoming something we've never seen before, something between hive and individual." The Quilari elders consulted among themselves. Finally, they reached a decision. "Let them search," the eldest said. "The human died teaching them. Perhaps there's a lesson here for all of us. Let us see what they discover." So the three children were given freedom to pursue their obsession. They turned Anne's classroom into a study space. They covered the walls with notes, with theories, with possible endings to her sentence. Remember that humans believe in second chances. Remember that humans believe in sacrifice. Remember that humans believe in love. Remember that humans believe in you. Each possibility felt close but wrong, like a puzzle piece that almost fit but had the wrong shape. Late one night, nearly a month after Anne's death, Pip stared at the yellow chalk circle still on the board. The word promise had been preserved exactly as Anne had written it. The classroom had become a memorial, but also a mystery to be solved. "What if," Pip said slowly, "we're asking the wrong question?" Cress and Nell turned to him. "What if she wasn't trying to tell us what humans believe in?" Pip continued. "What if she was trying to tell us what belief itself means? The act of believing, not the object of belief?" Nell's shell glowed softly. "You mean the sentence was complete? Remember that humans believe. Period. Full stop, that's the whole message?" "No," Cress said, antennae waving with sudden excitement. "It's incomplete on purpose. She was teaching us one last lesson. About ellipsis, about unfinished thoughts. She told us that day that we fill in the meaning ourselves using context and understanding of the speaker." The three children looked at each other. They were years away from truly understanding what Anne had tried to tell them. But in that moment they grasped something fundamental. Anne hadn't left them a message to decode. She'd left them a question to answer. What do you believe? What will you choose to believe? And what will you do because of that belief? We're not ready to answer yet, Pip said quietly. We don't know how to believe like she did. We don't know how to make that kind of choice. Then we learn, Cress said firmly. We study, we grow. We search until we understand. And when we understand, Nell added, we'll finish her sentence. We'll choose what it means. For ourselves. 3 young Kalari, barely old enough to have hardened shells, made a promise that night. They would learn what belief meant. They would discover what Anne had tried to teach them. They would finish her sentence. Even if it took the rest of their lives. 3 years had changed everything and nothing at all. Dusthaven grew larger, adding new structures and more families. The scars from the raid faded from the buildings, but not from memory. And in the center of the colony, Anne's classroom remained untouched, a memorial that 3 young Kalari visited every single day. Pip's shell had fully hardened now, taking on a deep amber color unusual for his species. Quilari shells typically reflected their hive's collective patterns, but Pip had carved symbols into his carapace. Human symbols, words in human languages, courage, sacrifice, promise. Cress's shell was darker, almost black, and she'd developed a habit of moving alone rather than in formation with others. This disturbed the elder Kalari deeply. Their species moved in harmony, reading each other's micro-movements and adjusting automatically. But Cress walked her own path, literally and figuratively. Nell remained small, her growth stunted by the trauma or perhaps by choice. But her mind had expanded in ways that frightened the hive. She spoke 6 human languages fluently now and could quote human philosophers from memory. More disturbingly, she questioned things, questioned hive decisions, questioned collective wisdom. This is unnatural, Vril told Director Halson during one of their regular meetings. They're becoming too human, losing their connection to the hive mind. Halson, older and grayer than he'd been 3 years ago, shook his head. They're not losing anything. They're gaining something. Anne taught them that. Anne Reeves died teaching them an incomplete thought, Vril said, frustration making his mandibles click rapidly. And now they've built their entire existence around solving a mystery that may have no answer. All the best mysteries don't have simple answers, Halson replied. The 3 Kalari had indeed built their lives around Anne's unfinished sentence. They studied at the Human Academy now, taking advanced courses in linguistics, philosophy, and human military history. Their quarters were filled with texts, tablets, and handwritten notes covering every surface. Pip focused on warrior traditions across human cultures. He studied ancient Earth history, reading about soldiers who held impossible positions, about last stands and final defenses. He watched footage of human battles, trying to understand the moment when someone chose to die rather than retreat. "It's not about death," he told Cress one evening while reviewing footage from the Battle of Europa Station. "Humans don't want to die. They choose to die for something. The thing they die for, that's what matters." Cress studied human art and poetry. She discovered that humans expressed belief through creation, through making things that served no practical purpose but meant everything emotionally. She spent hours in the colony's small museum, staring at paintings, listening to music, reading poems that made no logical sense but somehow meant something. One poem kept drawing her back. It was ancient from Earth by a human named Dylan Thomas. "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage. Rage against the dying of the light." "It's not advice," she told Nell. "It's a command, a belief turned into action. Humans believe they should fight against death, against darkness, against entropy itself, even when they know they'll lose." Nell took the most academic approach. She studied cognitive patterns, neural structures, decision-making processes. She wanted to understand the precise moment when belief overrode logic, when the emotional brain took control from the rational one, when someone like Anne saw death coming and chose to face it anyway. "There's a chemical response," Nell explained to a human neuroscience professor. "When humans face extreme threat, cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. This should trigger flight response. But in some humans, a different response activates. They move toward danger instead of away. Why?" The professor, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, considered the question carefully. "We call it the heroic impulse. It's partly genetic, partly learned, partly situational. But honestly, we don't fully understand it ourselves. We just know that some people in some moments choose to be shields for others." "Anne was a shield," Nell said quietly. "She put herself between danger and us, literally, physically. Why?" "Because she believed you were worth it," Dr. Park said simply. "She believed your lives had value greater than her own." This answer haunted Nell for weeks. Dr. Yuki Sato had become an unofficial mentor to the three Quilari. She met with them regularly, helping them process human concepts that the hive mind couldn't explain. One afternoon, 4 years after Anne's death, Yuki brought them to her office and closed the door. Her expression was serious. "I've been contacted by the Galactic Council," she said. "They've heard about you three, about what you're trying to do." "We're not trying to do anything except understand," Pip said defensively. "That's exactly what interests them," Yuki replied. "Understanding between species. 3 Kalari children who've learned to think like individuals while maintaining connection to the hive. It's unprecedented. They want to study you." "No," Cress said immediately. "We're not specimens." Yuki smiled slightly. "That's a very human response. But I'm not suggesting you agree. I'm warning you that attention is coming. Your quest to understand Anne's last words has become famous. Humans and Quilari across multiple colonies are following your progress. Some admire you, some think you're disturbed. But everyone's watching." Nell's antennae drooped. "We haven't made progress. We've been searching for 4 years and we're no closer to understanding what she meant." "Maybe," Yuki said gently, "because you're looking for a specific answer when she was teaching you a way of thinking." "We've considered that," Pip said. "But it feels incomplete, like we're missing something fundamental." Yuki pulled out her tablet and showed them a message. It was from Commander Francis, Anne's old military colleague. "He wants to meet with you," Yuki said. "He says he has something Anne left behind, something he was supposed to give you when you were ready." The 3 Quilari exchanged glances. Their antennae touched briefly, sharing unspoken communication through the remnants of their hive connection. "When?" Cress asked. "Tomorrow. But there's something else." Yuki's expression grew more serious. "The Council has announced a joint operation. Human and Quilari forces working together for the first time. A new threat has emerged in the outer colonies. They're calling it the Devourer Fleet." "Devourers?" Nell asked. "Species that specializes in raiding colonies and taking young. Any species. They don't discriminate. They hit fast, take what they want, and disappear. They've destroyed 3 mixed colonies in the past 6 months." Yuki paused. "The Council needs soldiers. They're asking for volunteers from both humans and Kalari." Pip's shell darkened. Are you suggesting we volunteer? I'm saying that if you want to understand what Anne did, why she made the choice she made, you might need to face what she faced. Not in a classroom, not in recordings, but in the real moment when death is possible and choice becomes necessary. The meeting with Commander Francis happened in Anne's old classroom. The memorial had been maintained perfectly. The yellow chalk circle still showed promise in Anne's handwriting. The desks sat exactly where they'd been. Even the storage unit where the children had hidden remained sealed. Francis was older now, moving stiffly as he entered the room. He carried a small metal box, worn and dented. Pip, Cress, Nell, he said, nodding to each. You've grown. You have messages from Teacher Anne? Pip asked immediately. In a way. Francis set the box on Anne's desk. This was in her quarters at the Marine base years before she came to Dust Haven. Her personal effects. I was listed as next of kin since she had no close family. When I heard what you three were trying to do, I thought you should see this. He opened the box. Inside were medals, commendations, photographs, and a small notebook. Francis pulled out the notebook and handed it to Cress. She kept a journal during the frontier conflicts. Read it. You'll see what she was thinking during combat, what she believed when she was your age. Cress opened the journal with trembling limbs. The handwriting was Anne's, but younger, shakier. The entries were dated 15 years earlier. The first entry they read was dated 3 days after a major battle. We lost Henderson today. She threw herself on a grenade to save our unit. Just threw herself on it. Didn't hesitate. Everyone says she's a hero, and she is. But I can't stop thinking about the moment before. The split second when she saw the grenade and her brain calculated survival odds and she chose to die instead. What was she thinking? Did she think at all, or was it pure instinct? Does it matter? She's gone and 6 of us are alive because of her. That's what matters. That's what has to matter. Nell read another entry from months later. I'm starting to understand why we fight. It's not for territory or resources or even survival. We fight because we believe the people next to us are worth fighting for. That sounds simple, but it's everything. Yesterday I carried Rodriguez 3 miles under enemy fire. My rational brain screamed to leave him. Drop the weight. Increase survival odds. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because somewhere along the way I started believing that his life was as important as mine. Maybe more important. When did that happen? When did I start valuing others more than myself? And why does it feel right? Francis watched them read. Anne struggled with belief her entire military career. She saw people die for causes she didn't understand. She saw sacrifice that seemed pointless. But slowly she came to understand something. What? Pip asked. That belief isn't about certainty. It's about choice. You choose to believe something has meaning. You choose to believe someone matters. You choose to believe that your death might mean someone else's life. The choosing is what makes it real. The 3 Quillari absorbed this in silence. There's one more thing, Francis said. He pulled out a final piece of paper from the box. This was Anne's last letter to me. She wrote it the week before she died. He unfolded the letter and read aloud. Francis, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I asked Director Halson to send you my personal effects if I die out here in Dust Haven. I know you think I'm crazy for leaving the Corps to teach alien kids on the edge of nowhere. Maybe I am. But I found something here I never found in combat. Purpose, real purpose. Not following orders or holding lines. Actually building something. Those 3 Quillari children, Pip and Cress and Nell, they're going to change everything. I can feel it. They're learning to think beyond the hive. Learning to choose. Learning to believe. If something happens to me, find them. Tell them that I believed in them. Tell them that belief is a choice they have to make for themselves. Tell them to choose what matters and hold to it no matter what. That's what makes us human, Francis. Not DNA or culture or technology. The ability to believe in something bigger than ourselves and act on that belief even when it defies logic. I'm trying to teach them that. I hope I live long enough to see them understand it. But if I don't, tell them I died believing they would figure it out eventually. Tell them I died certain that they matter. Tell them that was enough. That will always be enough. The letter ended. Francis refolded it carefully and handed it to Pip. She knew, Pip said, voice hollow. She knew she might die, and she stayed anyway. She chose to stay, Francis corrected, because she believed in you 3 more than she feared death. Nell's shell glowed with emotion. But we still don't understand. We've read everything, studied everything, We know what she did, but not why it mattered so much to her. Why we mattered so much. Francis smiled sadly. Because you're asking an intellectual question about an emotional truth. You can't reason your way to belief. You have to experience it. You have to face a moment when logic says one thing and your heart says another. You have to choose. How? Cress asked. How do we create that moment? You don't create it, Francis said. You wait for it. Or in this case, you volunteer for it. The three Kilari looked at each other. They'd been thinking the same thing since Yuki mentioned the joint operation. The Devourers, Pip said. The Devourers, Francis confirmed. Joint human Quillari force heading out next month. They need soldiers. They need people who understand both species. They need bridges. That's what Anne called you in her letter, bridges. We've never fought, Nell said. We have no military training. Anne had training, Francis said. Didn't stop her from being terrified. Training doesn't erase fear. It just gives you tools to act despite it, he paused. But this is your choice. Anne wouldn't want you to die trying to understand her death. She'd want you to live, to build, to teach others what she taught you. We can't teach what we don't understand, Cress said firmly. We've been searching for 4 years and we're not closer. Maybe Francis is right. Maybe we need to face what she faced. We need to feel what she felt, Pip added. The moment of choice. The moment when survival instinct screams one thing and belief demands another. We need to finish her sentence, Nell finished. And we can't do that from a classroom, Francis nodded slowly. Then I'll recommend you to the recruitment officer. But understand this isn't a field trip. This isn't research. If you volunteer, you might die. Real death, final death. Not metaphor, not mystery, gone. Teacher Anne faced that, Pip said, for us. If we're not willing to face it ourselves, then we've learned nothing. The decision was made. 3 Quillari who'd spent 4 years trying to understand one incomplete sentence would go to war. They would volunteer for the joint operation against the Devourers. They would put themselves in situations where death was possible and choice became necessary. They would search for the end of Anne's sentence in the only place it could truly be found. In the moment when belief overcame survival, when meaning overcame logic, when the choice to sacrifice became real. As they left Anne's classroom that day, Pip paused at the door. He looked back at the yellow chalk circle, at the word promise still visible after all these years. We're keeping your promise, Teacher Anne, he whispered. We're searching. We're choosing. We're becoming what you believed we could be. The 3 of them walked out together, not in hive formation, but as individuals who'd chosen the same path. They were going to war to find peace, going to death to understand life, going to the edge of survival to learn what it meant to believe. Anne would have been proud, or perhaps terrified, probably both. But she would have understood why they had to go. The military transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Pip gripped the safety harness, feeling his shell vibrate with the impact. Around him, 200 soldiers prepared for deployment. Half were human, half were Quillari. The mixing of species in combat units was still new, still awkward. Humans and Quillari had fought alongside each other before, but never truly together. 6 months had passed since Pip, Cress, and Nell volunteered. 6 months of training that nearly broke them. Humans trained for war through controlled aggression and individual skill building. Quillari trained through hive coordination and collective tactical calculation. The 3 young Quillari fell somewhere between, belonging fully to neither approach. First drop in 5 minutes, Commander Sarah Park announced over the ship's communication system. Our mission is evacuation support. Colony World Refuge 7 is under Devourer attack. We extract civilians and hold the line until everyone's out. Simple and clear. Nothing about war was simple or clear. Pip had learned that quickly. Beside him, Cress checked her equipment for the 10th time. Quillari didn't normally use weapons. Their shells and natural acids were usually sufficient. But in this new military integration, they carried human firearms modified for their limb structure. Cress held hers like it might bite her. Nervous? Asked a human soldier named Ryan. He was young, maybe 20 Earth years, with the kind of easy confidence that came from not yet having faced real combat. Yes, Cress answered honestly. Are you not? Terrified, Ryan admitted. But the sergeant says fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. Teacher Anne was afraid, Nell said from across the compartment. Commander Francis told us. She was always afraid, but she fought anyway. Ryan gave them a curious look. The story of the three Kalari searching for their dead teacher's last words had spread through the military. Some soldiers found it inspiring, others found it strange, but everyone knew about them. "You really think you'll find your answer out here?" Ryan asked. "In combat?" "We think we'll understand the question better," Pip replied. The transport shook as it entered Refuge 7's atmosphere. Through the small windows, Pip could see smoke rising from multiple points across the colony. The Devourers had hit hard and fast as they always did. Their ships looked organic, like massive insects made of metal and bone. They didn't conquer territory. They just took what they wanted, which was usually the young of any species they encountered. 2 minutes, Commander Park said. "Remember your training. Humans and Kalari work together. Watch each other's backs. We're one unit now." Pip wondered if that was true. He'd seen hesitation during training. Humans who didn't trust Quillari to hold a position. Quillari who couldn't understand human aggressive tactics. The bridge between species was still being built, and they were fighting on it before it was finished. The transport touched down hard. The rear door dropped with a pneumatic hiss. Sound and chaos flooded in, weapons fire screaming, the horrible shrieking sound Devourer ships made when they moved. It was nothing like training simulations, nothing like the clean, organized warfare in historical recordings. It was messy and loud and terrifying. "Move, move, move!" shouted Sergeant Williams, a veteran with scars from a dozen campaigns. The soldiers poured out of the transport into a colony that was dying. Buildings burned, bodies lay in the streets, and everywhere civilians ran in panic, trying to reach evacuation points. Pip's squad had a simple mission: secure the northern extraction point and hold it until the last transport lifted. There were children in the shelter there. Always children. The Devourers specialized in taking them. They moved through streets that reminded Pip painfully of Dust Haven. Similar architecture, similar layout. A school stood on the corner, its windows shattered. For a moment, Pip saw Anne standing in a doorway, saw her falling, saw her die again in his memory. "Contact left," Ryan shouted. A Devourer dropped from a building. It was insectoid like Quillari, but wrong. Twisted with too many limbs and mouths that opened vertically instead of horizontally. It shrieked and lunged at the squad. Training took over. Humans fired in controlled bursts. Quillari released combat acids that burned through chitin. The Devourer went down, but 3 more appeared behind it. The battle blurred into a series of moments that Pip would later struggle to separate. He fired his weapon until it ran dry. He saw Ryan take a hit to the shoulder and keep fighting. He saw a Quillari warrior named Kresh drag a wounded human to safety despite being injured himself. He saw courage and terror existing in the same moment, in the same beings. They reached the extraction point with half their squad wounded. The shelter entrance was sealed, but they could hear people inside, mostly children. Their cries carried clearly. "Set up a perimeter," Sergeant Williams ordered. "Next transport arrives in 15 minutes. We hold until then." 15 minutes. In training, that was nothing. A brief exercise. A quick drill. But standing in a burning colony with Devourers closing in from 3 directions, 15 minutes felt like eternity. "They're coming," Cress said, her antennae picking up vibrations before anyone else could sense them. Many of them. She was right. The Devourers had realized where the last group of civilians were hiding. They wanted those children, needed them for whatever horrible purpose they served, and they were willing to spend lives to get them. The squad opened fire as the first wave hit. Pip found himself fighting beside a human corporal named Lee. They fell into an unspoken rhythm. Lee would fire high while Pip fired low. They covered each other's reloads without discussing it. In that moment, species didn't matter. Only survival mattered. Only protecting the children in the shelter mattered. A Devourer broke through the line. It was huge, twice the size of the others, with armor that deflected their weapons. It charged straight at Pip, mandibles opening wide enough to bite him in half. Lee threw himself between them. The Devourer's strike caught him across the chest. The human soldier went down hard, blood spreading across his armor. "No!" Pip screamed. He fired point blank at the Devourer's exposed underbelly. The creature shrieked and collapsed. Pip dropped beside Lee. The human was still alive but badly hurt. "Medic!" Pip shouted. "Medic!" Lee grabbed Pip's arm weakly. "The kids," he said through blood-flecked lips. "Keep them safe." "You're going to be fine," Pip said, but even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He'd seen enough death now to recognize it. Worth it, Lee said. His eyes were unfocused. They're worth it. Tell my family I said that. Tell them it was worth it. Lee died with his hand still gripping Pip's arm, died with those words as his last. Worth it. Something cracked open inside Pip in that moment. Lee hadn't known him well. They'd trained together for a few months, served together for a few weeks. But Lee had thrown himself between Pip and death anyway. Had chosen to die so Pip could live. Because he believed Pip was worth it. Just like Anne had believed Pip, Cress and Nell were worth dying for. 10 minutes, Sergeant Williams called out. The squad was down to 30 soldiers now. The Devourers kept coming. They'd lost the eastern approach and were barely holding the western one. Bodies lay everywhere. Human and Quillari and Devourer mixed together in the ugly democracy of death. Nell had taken up position at the shelter door itself, the last line of defense. If the Devourers got past her, they'd breach the shelter. She fired methodically, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. Her small frame shook with each recoil, but she didn't retreat. Cress fought beside Ryan, who'd refused treatment for his shoulder wound. They moved together like they'd been fighting together for years instead of hours. When Ryan's weapon jammed, Cress covered him. When Cress was surrounded, Ryan charged in with a blade. 5 minutes, Sergeant Williams said. The human was bleeding from multiple wounds, but still standing, still commanding. Just 5 more minutes, 5 minutes. So short, so long. Pip watched a Quillari warrior named Beth stand her ground against 3 Devourers, taking one down before the others overwhelmed her. He watched a human private, barely 18, drag 2 children to safety even as acid burned through her leg. He watched beings choose to sacrifice, to suffer, to die for strangers, and he began to understand. Belief wasn't an intellectual exercise. It wasn't something you reasoned your way to. It was a feeling so strong that it overrode every survival instinct. It was knowing, absolutely knowing, that something mattered more than your own life. Lee had known it. Anne had known it. Every soldier holding this line knew it. They believed the children in that shelter were worth dying for. They believed it so completely that they chose to stay when logic screamed to run. They chose to fight when odds screamed to surrender. They chose to bleed and hurt and die because belief demanded it. "Transport incoming," someone shouted. The heavy transport ship dropped through the smoke, weapons blazing, driving back the Devourers. It touched down behind their position. The shelter door opened and civilians poured out. Humans, Quillari, other species, all carrying children, supporting elderly, helping wounded. "Get them loaded," Sergeant Williams ordered. "We hold until the last one's aboard." The evacuation happened in controlled chaos. Soldiers formed a corridor, firing outward, keeping the Devourers back through sheer volume of weapons fire. The civilians ran through that corridor of violence to safety. Pip saw a human woman carrying 2 Quillari younglings, saw a Quillari male shielding human children with his body, saw species that had been separate for millennia, holding each other up in shared desperation. A Devourer broke through the line near Nell. It lunged at a group of children still running for the transport. Nell didn't hesitate. She threw herself into its path, her small body impacting the massive creature. Her weapon fired point blank into its mouth. The Devourer shrieked and fell, but its death throes caught Nell, throwing her hard against a wall. "Nell!" Cress screamed. Pip and Cress reached her together. Nell's shell was cracked, leaking the blue fluid that served as Quillari blood. But she was conscious and her eyes were clear. "I understand," she said. "I finally understand." "Don't talk," Pip said. "Medic is coming. Cress's show." "She wasn't telling us what to believe," Nell continued, her words coming fast and urgent. "She was showing us how. You feel it, don't you? You'd die for those children. Right now. Without thought. You'd throw yourself between them and death. That's what she felt. That's what she did." Cress's shell was glowing with emotion. "Yes," she said. "I feel it. I'd die for them. For any of them." "When did that happen? When did they become worth more than survival?" "Last civilian aboard," someone shouted. "All soldiers fall back to the transport." The squad began retreating in controlled sequence, still firing, still holding back the Devourer wave. Pip and Cress carried Nell between them. Ryan covered their retreat, firing until his weapon clicked empty, then using it as a club. They made it aboard the transport with seconds to spare. The door closed as Devourers clawed at the hull. The ship lifted with emergency thrust, shuddering and groaning. Through the windows, Pip saw the colony falling, saw buildings collapse, saw the devourers swarming over everything they couldn't take. But the children were safe. 218 civilians had been evacuated, most of them children. Most of them alive because soldiers chose to stand, chose to bleed, chose to die. 17 soldiers hadn't made it aboard. 17 beings who'd chosen to be the last to leave, to cover the retreat, to hold the line one moment longer, human and Quillari alike mixed in sacrifice. The transport shook as it climbed toward orbit. Medics worked frantically on the wounded. Pip sat beside Nell while a human medic sealed her cracked shell with emergency foam. Across the compartment, Ryan was being treated for his shoulder. His eyes met Pip's and something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. "Did we win?" asked a young Quillari soldier, voice shaking with shock and exhaustion. Sergeant Williams, being patched up by 2 medics, looked around the transport. At the wounded. At the exhausted. At the ones who would carry scars forever. Physical and mental. Then she looked at the huddled civilians, children clinging to parents, strangers holding each other in shared trauma and relief. "Yeah," she said quietly. "We won." Pip looked at his hands. They were shaking. His entire body was shaking. The fear he'd controlled during combat was catching up to him now. He'd almost died, had seen others die, had killed to protect, had been willing to die for beings he didn't know. And somewhere in that chaos, in that moment of standing between death and innocence, he'd felt what Anne had felt, not understood it intellectually, felt it viscerally in his shell and blood and bone. Belief, real belief, the kind that made you choose death over abandoning those who needed you, the kind that made sacrifice not just logical but necessary, the kind that made strangers worth dying for. She was trying to say, believe in them, Pip said suddenly. Not us specifically, them, any them, all of them. Believe that others are worth protecting, worth dying for, worth everything. No, Cress said from across the compartment. She was saying believe and letting us choose what comes next. The object of belief is personal, individual. We each have to choose what we believe in, what matters enough to die for. Maybe, Nell said weakly. It's both. Maybe the sentence was complete the way she said it. Remember that humans believe. Full stop. That's the whole lesson. That humans choose to believe in things, in people, in meaning, even when it's illogical, even when it costs everything. The believing itself is what makes us human, or in our case makes us more than just hive drones. The 3 of them sat in silence, processing. Around them, soldiers coped with survival in their own ways. Some cried. Some laughed with hysterical relief. Some sat in stunned silence. Some comforted each other. Humans and Quillari, no longer separate, no longer fully distinct. Just soldiers who'd bled together. Commander Park's voice came over the speaker. All squads, prepare for recovery at fleet staging area. Medical team standing by. You did good work today. You saved lives. That's what we're here for. That's what matters. What matters? Those words echoed in Pip's mind. Anne had known what mattered. Had chosen based on that knowledge. And now, 4 years later and thousands of light years from Dust Haven, Pip finally understood her choice. She'd believed they mattered. Believed it so deeply that dying mid-sentence was acceptable if her death meant they lived. The specific words didn't matter. The belief behind them did. But even understanding that, Pip knew they hadn't finished their search. They'd found part of the answer, felt it in blood and fear and sacrifice. But there was more. There had to be more. Because Anne hadn't just believed in the moment of death. She'd believed her entire life. She'd chosen teaching over fighting, chose building over destroying, chosen hope over despair every single day until the day she died. That kind of sustained belief, that kind of continuous choosing, that was something they still needed to learn. We're not done, Pip said. We understand what she felt now, but we don't fully understand how she lived with that feeling every day, how she chose hope again and again. Then we keep searching, Cress said. Keep choosing. Keep fighting. Keep believing, Nell finished. The transport carried them toward the fleet, toward recovery and rest, and eventually toward more battles. The war against the Devourers was just beginning. There would be more colonies to defend, more children to protect, more moments where choice became necessity and belief became action. And in those moments, 3 young Quillari who'd once hidden in a storage unit while their teacher died would stand in her place. Would be the shield, would be the choice, would be the belief made flesh. Anne's sentence remained incomplete in words, but in action, In choice and sacrifice, they were beginning to finish it, one battle at a time, one life saved at a time, one moment of belief at a time. Refuge 9 looked like every other colony world on the edge of civilized space. Prefabricated buildings, atmospheric processors humming in the distance, and a community of beings trying to build lives far from the complications of their homeworlds. But Refuge 9 had something that made it different. 4,000 children in underground shelters and a devourer fleet closing in with overwhelming force. Pip stood in what had been a schoolyard, watching soldiers establish defensive positions. 2 years had passed since his first combat drop. 2 years of fighting, learning, and slowly understanding what Anne had tried to teach them. His shell bore scars now, deliberate markings that told the story of every battle, every choice, every moment he'd stood between death and innocence. Cress coordinated fire teams nearby, her voice calm and steady as she positioned both human and Quillari soldiers. She'd grown into a natural leader, able to bridge the gap between species in ways that still baffled military strategists. Humans trusted her tactical mind. Quillari respected her ability to balance individual initiative with collective good. Nell worked in the command center, analyzing enemy patterns and calculating odds. She'd become essential to strategic planning, her unique perspective allowing her to see patterns others missed. But even with all her calculations, the numbers for Refuge 9 looked terrible. 500 soldiers, human and Quillari mixed, against an estimated 3,000 devourers with air support and heavy armor. Standard military doctrine said to evacuate and withdraw, cut losses, save who you could and abandon the rest. But there were 4,000 children in those shelters. Children who'd been moved underground when the warnings came. Children from 6 different species, all too young to evacuate safely ahead of the devourer arrival. Someone had to hold the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive. That someone was them. General Thomas Chen, overall commander of the joint human-Quillari force, called an assembly of all squad leaders. Pip, Cress, and Nell stood among dozens of veterans, most of whom had twice their combat experience. But the 3 Quillari had earned their place. Their story was known, and more importantly, their competence had been proven. "I won't lie to you," General Chen said, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of a man who'd made too many impossible decisions. "This is a bad situation. Reinforcements are 48 hours out. We need to hold for 2 full days against overwhelming numbers. Casualties will be severe, possibly catastrophic." He paused, looking around at the assembled soldiers. "The Quillari High Command has calculated 97% casualty probability if we stay. They're recommending strategic withdrawal. Take who we can and leave." A Quillari officer named Vex raised a limb. "And leave 4,000 young to the devourers? Unacceptable." "The human admiralty agrees," General Chen continued. "But I'm not ordering anyone to stay. This is volunteer only. If you want to evacuate with the civilians, we can get out. No one will blame you. No one will call you a coward. This is above and beyond." Pip felt Cress and Nell's antennae touch his own. The gesture was intimate, private, a form of communication unique to their modified hive connection. They didn't need to discuss. They all knew what they'd choose. "We stay," Pip said. His voice carried clearly across the assembled soldiers. General Chen looked at him. "You understand what I'm saying? 97% casualty rate. You'll probably die here." "Teacher Anne had worse odds," Cress said simply. "She stayed anyway." "The children are worth it," Nell added. "We believe that. We choose that." A human sergeant named Rivera spoke up. "The 3 of you have been looking for your teacher's last words for 7 years now? You really think dying here will help you find them?" "We're not looking anymore," Pip said. "We're living them." Silence fell over the assembly. Then one by one, soldiers began to speak. "I'll stay," said a Quillari warrior named Beth. "Staying," confirmed a human corporal named Lee. "We stay," said a mixed fire team of humans and Quillari together. Within 5 minutes, every single soldier had volunteered, all 500, human and Quillari alike, knowing the odds, understanding the likely outcome, choosing to stand anyway. General Chen's expression shifted from grim acceptance to something else. Pride, maybe, or perhaps recognition of something profound happening. This wasn't just a military decision. This was a philosophical statement. This was 500 beings declaring that some things mattered more than survival. "Then we hold," General Chen said. "We hold for 48 hours. We protect those children, and we show the devourers what happens when they threaten the young of any species. He paused. We show them what happens when humans and Quillari choose to believe in something together. The preparation took hours. Defensive positions were reinforced. Ammunition was distributed. Medical stations were established. The colony's layout was memorized. Every soldier knew their position, their fallback points, their rally zones. Pip's squad was assigned to defend the primary school, the largest of 3 shelter entrances. It was the obvious target, the one the Devourers would hit hardest, which meant it would likely be where the casualties were highest. As night fell on Refuge 9, Pip found himself standing in a classroom. It was eerily similar to Anne's. Same basic layout, same style of desks, same educational posters on the walls. He stared at a board where someone had written the day's lesson, abandoned mid-sentence when the evacuation began. Today we'll learn about the importance of community and how we, incomplete, like Anne's sentence, like so much of life, cut off before meaning could be fully expressed. Cress entered the classroom. You okay? Thinking about her, Pip admitted, wondering if she was scared, if she doubted. She was terrified, Cress said. Francis told us that. But she stood anyway. I'm scared, Pip said. I've been in combat dozens of times now, but this feels different. This feels final. Maybe it is, Cress said. She moved to stand beside him. Maybe we die tomorrow defending these children. Maybe that's how our story ends. Is it enough? Pip asked. We spent 7 years looking for the end of her sentence. If we die without finding it, was it all meaningless? Nell entered the classroom then, her shell glowing softly in the dim light. We found it already. We just haven't said it out loud yet. Both Pip and Cress turned to her. She said, remember that humans believe, Nell continued. But she wasn't just talking about humans. She was teaching us to believe. Teaching us that belief is a choice and action, a way of living. And we do believe now. We believe these children matter. We believe protecting them is worth dying for. We believe that standing here in this moment with these soldiers for this cause gives our lives meaning. So the sentence is complete? Cress asked. No, Nell said. Because belief isn't a destination. It's a continuous choice. Every day. Every moment. She believed every day of her life in big ways and small ways. She believed we could learn, believed the colony could work, believed humans and Quillari could build together, and when the moment came, when her final choice had to be made, she believed we were worth dying for. And now, Pip said slowly, understanding crystallizing, we're making the same choice, for different children, for the same reason. The sentence never ends, Cress said. It just continues. We finish it with our lives, with our choices, with what we do next and next and next until there is no more next. The 3 of them stood together in that classroom, understanding finally complete. Anne hadn't left them a riddle to solve. She'd left them a way of living to embrace. Belief as action, choice as meaning. Sacrifice as the ultimate expression of what truly mattered. The Devourers attacked at dawn. They came in waves like they always did, testing defenses, probing for weakness. The first wave was repelled. The second broke through the eastern perimeter. The third overwhelmed the northern approach. By mid-morning, the defensive lines had contracted to tight corridors around the 3 shelter entrances. Pip's squad held the schoolyard with desperate ferocity. Human and Quillari soldiers fought side by side, their movements synchronized through weeks of shared combat. When a human fell, a Quillari covered their position. When a Quillari was surrounded, humans charged in with blades and fury. The Devourers were relentless. For every one they killed, 2 more appeared. The enemy didn't fear death, didn't hesitate, didn't tire. They were a swarm with a single purpose, take the young. By afternoon, half the defending force was casualties. Medical stations overflowed with wounded. Ammunition ran low. Exhaustion set in. The Devourers sensed weakness and pressed harder. A massive Devourer, bigger than any Pip had seen before, broke through the western line. It headed straight for the school, straight for the shelter entrance. A dozen soldiers threw themselves in its path. The creature killed 4 before going down, but not before breaching the schoolyard perimeter. More followed it. Suddenly the schoolyard was overrun. The defensive line collapsed into desperate close-quarters combat. Pip found himself fighting back-to-back with Cress and Nell, the 3 of them forming a triangle of mutual protection. Fall back! General Chen's voice crackled over communications. All squads fall back to final defensive positions. But falling back meant leaving the shelter entrance exposed. Meant the devourers would breach it. Meant 4,000 children would be taken. Pip saw soldiers making calculations. Saw them weighing survival odds. Saw the moment when logic said retreat and belief said stay. And one by one, soldiers chose belief. "Negative, General," Sergeant Rivera said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We hold here. All of us." "Rivera, that's suicide," General Chen said. "Yeah," Rivera agreed. "But those kids are worth it, sir." Pip felt something break open in his chest. Not fear or pain, but a kind of fierce joy. He understood completely now. This was the moment Anne had faced. This was the choice she'd made. And making it himself, standing here with these soldiers ready to die for children he'd never met, felt right in a way nothing else ever had. "Teacher Anne," Pip said aloud, surprising himself. "I understand now. It's not about finding your words. It's about living them." Beside him, Cress laughed despite the blood staining her shell. She knew we'd figure it out. That's why she didn't finish the sentence. We had to finish it ourselves. "With our lives," Nell added. "With our choices. This is how we complete it." The battle continued. Hours blurred together. Soldiers fell and were replaced by others pulling back from evacuated positions. The perimeter shrank. The schoolyard became a killing ground, but the shelter entrance held. As the second day began, only 200 soldiers remained combat effective. They were wounded, exhausted, running on stimulants and willpower. The devourers kept coming, always kept coming. Pip stood at the shelter door itself now, the absolute last line of defense. If he fell, they'd breach. If they breached, everything was lost. A devourer charged at him. Pip fired until his weapon clicked empty. The creature kept coming. Pip dropped the weapon and raised his arms, ready to fight with natural weapons, with his shell and acids and claws, ready to die standing. The devourer was 2 steps away when the sky erupted with fire. Reinforcements had arrived early. 12 full combat ships dropped from orbit, weapons blazing, tearing through the devourer forces with overwhelming firepower. Drop pods slammed into the ground, disgorging fresh soldiers. Air support screamed overhead, missiles turning the battlefield into an inferno. The devourers broke. For the first time in the entire siege, they retreated. Scattered, fled back to their ships and jumped away, leaving their dead behind. Pip collapsed against the shelter door. Around him, soldiers did the same. Some laughed. Some cried. Some just sat in stunned silence. They'd held. Against impossible odds, against logic, against every reasonable expectation, they'd held for 48 hours. The shelter doors opened. Children poured out, followed by caretakers and parents. 4,000 young beings representing 6 different species. Alive because 500 soldiers had chosen to believe they were worth dying for. General Chen landed with the reinforcement wave. He walked through the battlefield looking at the survivors. 237 remained. More than half had died or been so badly wounded they'd been evacuated, but they'd won. Chen stopped in front of Pip, Cress, and Nell. The 3 Quillari were battered, bleeding, their shells cracked and scorched. But they were alive, standing together as they always did. "You held," Chen said simply. "We believed," Pip replied. Chen nodded slowly. "You 3 started this war looking for your teacher's last words. Did you find them?" Pip looked at the children streaming out of the shelter. Looked at the soldiers who'd stood with them. Looked at Cress and Nell, his companions in this 7-year search for meaning. "Yes," he said. "We found them." She was saying that belief is a choice. That we choose what matters. That we choose who matters. And that once we truly believe something, we'll stand for it no matter the cost. She believed we were worth dying for. And now we believe these children were worth the same. That's the answer. That's what she wanted us to understand. Not just understand, Cress added. To live, to become. To choose every day, Nell finished. Until the day we can't choose anymore. General Chen smiled, tired and sad and proud all at once. Your teacher would be proud of you. She already was, Pip said. That's what her last words meant. She died believing in us, believing we'd figure it out, and we did. Medical teams descended on the survivors, treating wounds and evacuating critical cases. The battlefield slowly transformed from war zone to recovery site. Bodies were collected, human and Quillari alike, to be honored and returned home. Pip stood in the schoolyard as the sun set on Refuge 9. A human child, maybe 6 years old, approached him hesitantly. She had dark hair and scared eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For not leaving us. Pip knelt down to her level. We couldn't leave you. You're too important. Why? The child asked with the blunt curiosity of the young. You don't know me. No, Pip agreed. But we believe you matter. We believe all of you matter. That's enough. The child hugged him, her small arms barely reaching around his thorax. Pip's shell, designed for combat and survival, had no real capacity for softness, but he tried to be gentle as he returned the embrace. This was why Anne had died. Not for him specifically, though she died protecting him. But for this moment, this feeling, this belief that a stranger's child was worth every sacrifice. Over the next days, as the colony was rebuilt and the dead were honored, something remarkable happened. The story of Refuge 9 spread across human and Quillari networks. 500 soldiers, knowing they'd likely die, choosing to stand anyway, choosing to protect children that weren't theirs, weren't their species, weren't their responsibility, choosing to believe. Young Quillari across multiple worlds heard the story and began to question. If Pip, Cress, and Nell could choose individual belief, could they? If these three could stand separate from the hive for something they personally believed in, couldn't others? The hive mind, vast and ancient and collective, felt something it had never experienced before. Individual doubt leading to individual choice. Not rebellion against the hive, but expansion of it. Quillari, who remained connected to the collective but made personal decisions based on personal beliefs. The change was small at first. A young Quillari choosing a career path the hive hadn't calculated. An adult Quillari volunteering for dangerous duty because they believed it mattered. A philosopher Quillari writing about the nature of individual purpose within collective harmony. But it grew, and it grew because 3 children had spent 7 years trying to understand one incomplete sentence, and in the process, had shown an entire species a new way to exist. Human military academies began teaching the Refuge 9 stand as a case study in integrated warfare and the power of conviction. But more than tactics, they taught about choice. About the moment when soldiers decide what they're willing to die for and stand accordingly. Anne's name became known across civilized space. Not as a hero, though she was one, but as a teacher whose final lesson had taken 7 years to fully understand and would take generations to fully embrace. Pip, Cress, and Nell were offered commissions, medals, positions of honor. They declined all of it. Instead, they requested one thing: to return to Dusthaven, to the colony where their journey began. To the classroom where Anne had died. Permission was granted. A small ceremony was held as they departed, attended by every soldier who'd fought at Refuge 9. General Chen presented them with a memorial stone, inscribed with the names of all who'd died in the 48-hour stand. Carry them with you, Chen said. Let them be part of your answer. The 3 Quillari returned to Dusthaven 7 years, 4 months, and 16 days after Anne's death. The colony had grown. The memorial to the raid victims had expanded. But Anne's classroom remained preserved, a monument to sacrifice and teaching. They entered together, their shells bearing the scars of dozens of battles. The yellow chalk circle was still there, faded but visible, the word promise still legible. Pip approached the board. He picked up a piece of yellow chalk from the tray, miraculously still there after all these years. With careful strokes, he added words beneath Anne's. Promise kept. We understand now. We believe. Cress added her own message. You taught us to choose. We chose to stand. We'll keep choosing. Nell wrote simply. Thank you for believing we could learn. We did. They stood together looking at the board. 7 years of searching. 7 years of fighting. 7 years of slowly transforming from frightened children hiding in darkness to warriors who stood in the light. Is it enough? Cress asked. Do we finally have our answer? We have an answer, Pip said. Maybe not the answer, but our answer. She was teaching us that belief is active, continuous, chosen. She believed in us so completely she died mid-sentence trusting we'd understand. And we do. So what now? Nell asked. We found what we were looking for. What do we do with it? We live it, Pip said. We teach it. We pass it on like she tried to pass it to us. We become teachers, Cress said, understanding. Not just soldiers. Teachers who show others what she showed us. We bridge worlds, Nell added, like she wanted. We help humans and Quillari and every other species understand that belief, real belief, is something we can share, something that makes us stronger together. They left the classroom that day with a new mission, not to fight, though they'd fight again when necessary, but to teach, to build, to show others what 7 years of searching and sacrifice had taught them. Anne's sentence remained incomplete on paper. Children, when you remember this day, remember that humans believe, but in life, in action, in the choices of 3 Quillari who'd learned to stand between death and innocence. The sentence found its completion. Believe, choose, stand, protect, sacrifice, love, teach, continue. The sentence never ended because belief never ended. It just continued. One choice at a time, one stand at a time, one moment at a time. Anne had known that, had died knowing her students would eventually understand, and they did. Finally, completely, irrevocably they did. 10 years after Anne Reeves fell mid-sentence, the galaxy looked different, not in obvious ways. The same species still occupied the same territories. The same conflicts still simmered. But something fundamental had shifted in how beings understood each other and themselves. Pip stood before a classroom of mixed-species students on a colony world called New Earth. His shell was gray now, marked not just by battle scars but by age and experience. He was 31 years old by Quillari reckoning, middle-aged by human standards, and he'd spent the last 5 years teaching. Who can tell me, he asked the class, why individual belief is important even in collective societies? A young Quillari raised a delicate limb. Her name was Rose and her shell was still soft, translucent. She reminded Pip painfully of himself at that age. Because the collective is made of individuals, Rose answered. And if no individual chooses what matters, then the collective only calculates what works. Meaning comes from choice, not from calculation. Pip felt a swell of pride. Exactly right. A human boy named Peter spoke up. But isn't it dangerous? My dad says individual belief caused the old wars. Everyone believing different things and fighting about it. Your dad's not wrong, Pip said. He sat on the edge of his desk, a gesture he'd learned from Anne. Belief without wisdom, without compassion, without willingness to understand others, that can be destructive. But belief with those things, belief that includes respect for others' beliefs, that's what builds bridges. Like you and Teacher Cress and Teacher Nell, another student said. You 3 believe the same things. No, Pip said honestly. We believe differently about many things. Cress believes in artistic expression as the highest form of meaning. Nell believes in intellectual pursuit and understanding. I believe in direct action and protection. But we all believe in each other. We all believe that differences make us stronger. And we all believe that teaching you, helping you understand both individual choice and collective harmony, is worth dedicating our lives to. The lesson continued, weaving together philosophy and practical examples. Pip taught the way Anne had taught, through stories and questions, through engagement rather than lecture. He told them about the stand at Refuge 9, about soldiers who chose to stay, about children saved because beings believed they mattered. After class, Pip walked across campus to the administrative building. The school was new, purpose-built for integrated education. Human and Quillari architects had designed it together, creating spaces that accommodated multiple species' needs while encouraging interaction and shared learning. Cress met him in the hallway. Her shell had developed intricate patterns, artistic designs she'd carved herself. She taught art and cultural studies, helping young beings understand expression and meaning across species barriers. Ready for tomorrow? She asked. As ready as I can be, Pip replied. Tomorrow was the 10th anniversary ceremony at Dust Haven, a memorial service for Anne and all who died in the raid. But more than that, it was an unveiling. The colony had commissioned a monument, and Pip, Cress, and Nell had been asked to speak. Nell joined them, moving slowly. She'd been injured badly at Refuge 9 and never fully recovered. She walked with a mechanical support attached to her lower limbs, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. She taught advanced mathematics and philosophy, challenging students to think in new ways about old problems. I've been reviewing my speech, Nell said. I keep wanting to explain everything. The search, the answers, the meaning. But I think Anne would want it simpler. She would, Cress agreed. She always made complex things simple so everyone could understand. They walked together toward the dormitories where they kept their quarters. Even after years apart, fighting in different campaigns, teaching in different locations, they always came back together. The bond formed in that storage unit, hiding in darkness while their teacher died, had never broken. Do you still think about the sentence? A voice asked behind them. They turned to find Captain Paul Reeves. Anne's younger brother had joined the military 5 years ago, inspired by his sister's sacrifice. He'd specifically requested assignment to the Joint Human-Quillari Forces and had served with distinction. Every day, Pip admitted, but not like before. Not as a mystery to solve, just as a reminder of what we learned. What did you learn? Paul asked. He'd heard the story dozens of times but never tired of it. That belief is a verb, not a noun, Cress said. It's something you do, not something you have. That meaning is chosen, not given, Nell added. Every being must decide what matters to them and live accordingly. That sacrifice isn't about death, Pip finished. It's about what you're willing to live for, and that sometimes living for something means dying for it. Paul nodded slowly. She would be proud of you three, of what you've become, of what you've built. We built it together, Pip said. Humans and Quillari, everyone who stood at Refuge 9, everyone who believed that protecting the young mattered more than survival. Your sister started it, but we're all finishing it, together. The next day they traveled to Dust Haven. The colony had grown significantly. What had been a small outpost was now a thriving settlement of 12,000 souls. Human and Quillari families lived side by side, children playing together in the streets, cultures mixing and merging in organic ways. But the memorial site remained quiet and solemn. Anne's classroom had been enclosed in a larger structure, a museum dedicated to integration and sacrifice. Thousands gathered for the ceremony, beings who'd traveled from across known space to honor the dead and celebrate what their deaths had built. The monument was covered by a cloth. It would be revealed at the ceremony's end. But first, speeches. Leaders from both human and Quillari governments spoke about cooperation and shared values. Military commanders talked about the joint forces and their successes. Philosophers discussed the evolution of Quillari culture toward individual expression. Then it was time for Pip, Cress, and Nell to speak. They approached the podium together, as they did everything. Pip spoke first. 10 years ago, our teacher died protecting us. She fell mid-sentence, and we spent 7 years trying to understand what she meant to say. We searched through books and battles. We studied human culture and fought human wars. We became warriors and scholars and teachers, all trying to finish one incomplete sentence. He paused, looking out at the thousands gathered, humans and Quillari and other species, young and old, military and civilian, all connected by the story of a teacher who'd chosen to die rather than abandon her students. We found our answer at Refuge 9, Pip continued, standing in another schoolyard, defending other children, facing the same choice Anne faced. We learned that she wasn't giving us information to remember. She was teaching us a way to live, a way to choose, a way to believe so completely that sacrifice becomes not just acceptable, but necessary. Cress stepped forward. Anne's sentence was, "With children, when you remember this day, remember that humans believe." And then she died. For 7 years we thought the sentence was incomplete, but we understand now that it was complete. The pause, the unfinished quality, that was intentional. She was teaching us about choice one final time. She was saying that humans believe, Nell added. Full stop. That's the lesson. Humans choose to believe in things. They believe in goodness and hope in each other. Even when logic says not to, they believe and then act on that belief. And she was showing us 3 young Quillari that we could learn to believe too, not as part of a hive calculating probabilities, but as individuals choosing what matters. Pip spoke again. We spent 7 years searching for words, but the answer was never in words. It was in action, in choice, in standing between death and innocence because we believe innocence is worth protecting, in teaching because we believe understanding between species matters, in living every day according to what we've chosen to believe in. The crowd was silent, listening intently. Anne died believing in us, Cress said, her voice thick with emotion. She believed we could learn, could grow, could become bridges between our species, and her belief was so strong, so complete, that dying for it seemed right to her, seemed obvious, seemed like the only choice that mattered. And now, Nell said, we live believing in you, in all of you, in what we can build together. In children growing up seeing different species as family, in soldiers standing together regardless of origin, in teachers showing students that meaning comes from choice and belief is an action. Pip looked at the covered monument behind them, We're going to unveil this memorial in a moment. But before we do, we want to finish Anne's sentence, not with the words she might have said, but with the words we've learned through living her lesson. The three of them spoke together, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent chills through the crowd. Remember that humans believe. Remember that we can all learn to believe. Remember that belief is a choice you make every day. Remember that some things are worth believing in so completely that you'll stand for them, fight for them, die for them if necessary. Remember that children are always worth protecting. Remember that understanding is always worth pursuing. Remember that teaching is always worth dedicating yourself to. Remember that we are all stronger when we choose to believe in each other. They stepped back. Director Halson, older and preparing for retirement, pulled the cloth from the monument. It was beautiful and simple. 3 figures, clearly meant to be Anne, Pip, Cress, and Nell. Anne stood in front, arms spread wide as if shielding. The 3 Quilari children huddled behind her, but they weren't cowering. They were watching, learning, understanding. Below the figures, carved in stone, were words. She fell mid-sentence. They learned to finish it. We all must choose what it means. And then, in smaller text, Anne Reeves, teacher, protector, believer. She chose to stand. She chose to sacrifice. She chose to believe her students would understand. Her last lesson continues in everyone who chooses meaning over survival, who chooses to protect the vulnerable, who chooses to believe in something larger than themselves. The crowd stood in silence for a long moment. Then spontaneously they began to share, humans and Quilari, one by one speaking about their own beliefs, their own choices, their own moments when they'd had to decide what mattered most. A young Quilari named Crystal spoke about choosing to volunteer for medical service, despite the hive calculating her talents were better suited for engineering. A human soldier talked about staying with wounded comrades when he could have evacuated. A teacher described leaving a comfortable position to work in a struggling colony school. A parent told of adopting children from a different species because they believed family was choice, not biology. Story after story, belief after belief, choice after choice. The ceremony went on for hours, becoming not just a memorial but a celebration of what Anne had started and what her death had built. As evening fell, Pip found himself standing in Anne's preserved classroom one final time. The yellow chalk circle was still visible, though faded. The word promise still legible. But now there were other words too, added by visitors over the years. Promise kept. We remember. We believe. We choose. Thank you for teaching us. Thousands of messages in dozens of languages, from countless beings who'd been touched by the story of a teacher who died mid-sentence, and the students who spent their lives understanding why. Paul Reeves joined him in the classroom. Anne's brother had aged but still carried himself with military bearing. He placed a hand on Pip's shoulder, the gesture easy and familiar in a way that would have been impossible between humans and Quilari 10 years ago. Do you think she knows? Paul asked quietly. Wherever she is, do you think she knows what her death created? She knew before she died, Pip said with certainty. She believed it would matter. That's why she could make that choice. She didn't know the details, couldn't see 10 years into the future, but she believed her death would mean something, would teach something, would change something. And it did, Paul said. It did, Pip agreed. But not because of her death alone, because we chose to learn from it. Because soldiers at Refuge 9 chose to stand. Because teachers across the galaxy chose to teach what we learned. Because young beings like Rose in my classroom choose every day to believe in something bigger than themselves. They stood together in the quiet classroom. Outside, the memorial ceremony was transitioning to a celebration. Music played, food was shared. Beings from different worlds mingled and talked and laughed together. She'd like this, Paul said. Anne always said the best memorial for the dead is how the living choose to live. Then we're giving her the best memorial possible, Pip said. We're living the lesson she died teaching, every single day. Over the following years, the change Anne started continued to spread. More colonies were established with integrated populations. More schools taught both individual belief and collective harmony. More soldiers trained in joint forces, learning to trust across species lines. More families formed between different beings, choosing love over tradition. The Quilari species underwent a quiet revolution. The hive mind remained, providing connection and shared knowledge. But increasingly, individual Quilari made personal choices based on personal beliefs. They became a species of connected individuals rather than a collective that subsumed identity. Human culture changed too. Seeing Quilari learn to value individual choice made humans appreciate their own capacity for belief and sacrifice in new ways. The story of Anne and her students was taught in schools across human space, a reminder that belief required action and sacrifice had meaning only when freely chosen. Pip, Cress, and Nell continued teaching for another 20 years. They trained thousands of students, many of whom became teachers themselves. The ripple effect of their 7-year search for meaning spread across generations and across species. When Pip was old, his shell gray and worn, a young human student asked him the question he'd been asked countless times. "Did you ever really finish Teacher Anne's sentence?" Pip smiled, mandibles clicking in the Quilari expression of contentment. "Every day," he said. "Every time I choose to teach, I finish it a little more. Every time a student understands that meaning comes from choice, I finish it. Every time someone stands for what they believe in, we all finish it together." "So it never ends?" the student asked. "No," Pip said. "It never ends. That's what makes it beautiful." Anne started a sentence that will be finished and refinished by every being who learns to choose what they believe in and act accordingly. The sentence is alive, growing, changing, continuing. "Like belief itself," the student said. "Exactly like belief itself," Pip confirmed. Pip died at 63, old for a Quilari. Cress and Nell were with him at the end, as they'd been with him at the beginning. His last words were simple. "We finished it together. Thank you, Anne. Thank you for believing we could." Cress died 5 years later, her shell covered in the artistic designs she'd spent a lifetime creating. Each pattern told a story of belief and choice and meaning. Her students preserved them, turning her shell into a work of art displayed in museums across multiple worlds. Nell lived longest, her damaged body outlasting expectations through sheer stubbornness. She died at 78, surrounded by students and friends and colleagues from a dozen species. Her final words were mathematical, an equation that supposedly proved belief couldn't be quantified but could be chosen. Her students spent years trying to understand the equation, searching for meaning in numbers just as Pip, Cress, and Nell had once searched for meaning in words. And that was fitting. The search itself was the point. The choosing was the meaning. The continuous act of believing, of standing, of teaching, of learning, that was how Anne's sentence was finished, not once but continuously by everyone who understood that some things mattered enough to live for, fight for, die for. 200 years after Anne Reeves fell mid-sentence, her story was still taught across civilized space. The memorial at Dusthaven had become a pilgrimage site. Beings from every species came to stand in that preserved classroom, to see the yellow chalk circle, to read the messages left by millions of visitors. The incomplete sentence had become the most complete teaching in galactic history, not despite its incompleteness, but because of it. Because it forced every being who heard it to finish it themselves, to choose what they believed, to decide what mattered, to act accordingly. Anne's last lesson continued because it was a lesson that could never truly end. Belief was not a destination but a journey. Choice was not an event but a practice. Meaning was not given but created, day by day, moment by moment, being by being. She fell mid-sentence. The cubs didn't cry, only whispered, "Last words?" And the answer echoed across centuries and species and stars. The last words are the ones we speak through how we live. Through what we choose, through what we believe in so completely that we'll stand for it when everything else falls away. Anne's sentence was never meant to be finished with words. It was meant to be finished with lives, with choices, with beliefs turned into actions. And it was by thousands, by millions, by beings who heard the story and decided that they too would choose what mattered, would stand for what they believed in, would teach the next generation to do the same. The sentence continued, incomplete and perfect, teaching and growing, inspiring and challenging everyone who heard it to finish it themselves. Remember that humans believe, and then came the beautiful eternal pause, the space where each being must choose what comes next, the incompleteness that makes completion possible, the question that creates its own answer through how we live. Anne Reeves died mid-sentence, but her students and their students and their students' students kept speaking. The sentence lived on, unfinished and perfect, teaching forever what it meant to choose, to believe, to stand, to sacrifice, to love, to matter. And that was more than enough. That would always be enough.